I always believed that infrastructure software has to be open source. Why? Because at Amazon, imagine Amazon in the beginning 2000s. Amazon already had scale, which most companies don't even have right now. And they were hitting all the scaling issues, like big time back then. And they came up with awesome solutions for them. And Amazon created quite a few interesting technologies internally. But because it was internal, we never released any of that open source. With time, these technologies became obsolete because it's very hard to keep working and improving the product inside of the company. Because people build it, they move on, and a company never will invest 100 people into some internal infrastructure project. And it became clear that with time, all these technologies were replaced by other technologies or by open source technologies. And I believe that if company is building something, it needs to build it open source because it should have its own life. Otherwise, with time, it will become obsolete. And I think it's a very good example, Temporal is a technology which clearly much more useful beyond a single company. And right now, the investment we are getting and the amount of resources we are putting into that would be absolutely impossible in any other settings. We've got so much funding that no company would ever invest in a single internal product that much money.
I'm excited to be here today, co-hosting with Lenny and having Max and Samar here to talk about Temporal, which has become a foundational piece of infrastructure. You two have known each other. I feel like I'm crashing a reunion because you've all known each other for a very long time. I think when Max initially interviewed Samar in 2009?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know each other very, very well. You've worked together in different settings. Maybe you could introduce... tell me a little bit about each other.
Absolutely. First of all, thanks a lot for having us. I'm super excited
thank you for coming.
For today's call. Yeah, as you pointed out, I've known Max for over 16 years now. But this is the first time I'll be introducing him. So let's see.
It was time. It was time.
So Max grew up in Moscow, early education there. When I first met Max, by the way, Max said, I have a degree in computer science. And I said, that can't be right. That's not legit. Because no one from Russia back then essentially has degree. They are either math or physics degrees. Then I learned of something very new about Max, that he is a Russian who got his degree from Brazil. And so he got his computer science master's from Brazil, came to US, I think late 90s, did a bunch of early stage startups there. And then then joining Amazon in 2002. Max originally was part of the team that built the core backend for messaging, the messaging platform, which is now being used by SQS also underneath the covers. Very quickly realized that's the wrong abstraction, and then decided to embark on a journey to kind of figure out the right abstraction to build those asynchronous systems. Amazon back then was itself going through this whole transition from a monolith into a service-oriented architecture. So Max firsthand saw that transformation at a large company and how core of a role messaging plays there. So this is where Max kind of became the tech lead for Simple Workflow team back in 2009. And this is where I ended up joining with Max along on that journey. I was part of the foundation team that worked on the publicly available version of the Simple Workflow service alongside Max. After that, I think Max then ended up going to Google, spent a couple of years there. And then both of us actually got reunited in 2015 at
Google
Uber.
was your period apart.
Yeah. And then both of us got reunited in 2015 at Uber. Both of us joined within a month of each other.
Did you guys know that?
Completely fate.
Oh, coincidence.
Yeah.
Okay. He didn't re-interview each
Yeah,
other.
we didn't stayed in touch after I left Amazon. And then actually I joined Uber before him. And when I joined the Uber Seattle engineering team, one of the missions that they were planning to take on is building a messaging system. And I literally saw Max's resume float by, and I went up to the hiring manager. If you are serious about building a messaging system, that's the person.
That one.
Yeah, that's the person you need to hire. Yeah. So that's how we ended up interviewing Max. Max actually was about to join Amazon back again. So we intercepted and then quickly sped up the interview process. And somehow Max ended up taking a role at Uber, essentially. So the next 4 years at Uber was an insane journey. And among other things, Max and I helped build this open source platform by the name of Cadence, which became a pretty foundational technology at Uber. And then Lenny convinced both of us to...
That's too strong of a word, but gentle nudge.
To then basically...
Lenny's very convincing, yeah.
That put your money where your mouth is. And then like if you really believe in this thing, and that's how Temporal was born in October 2019. Max was the CEO of the company when we started. So I think Max, during the early stages, under Max leadership, Temporal grew from, I think, like almost like the two of us to roughly around 150 people. And then last year, like both of us decided that probably I should be taking on as a CEO role, and Max is now the CTO driving technical roadmap and strategic vision for the company.
That's amazing. Also to have folks who can flex into the CEO and CTO role when it's needed in the company. I think that explanation of Max is more in depth than I could do in a background of myself. So
Yeah, Max.
that was awesome. So
That's the advantage you get after working 16 years with. Yeah.
You set a high bar for
yeah, I was
Max.
going to say you set a really high bar, but you also covered some of the things. So, you get the pass for talking about Cadence, et cetera. Tell us about Samar.
Your hunch actually was right. I have a physics degree from Russia.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just my computer science.
See, now I know.
My computer science degree is from Brazil. Yeah, I think about Samar. He's from Pakistan, and you finished the best school there, right? I don't remember.
Yeah, I graduated from Ghulam Isa Khan there.
Yeah, and then he joined Microsoft because Microsoft was interviewing in all countries in the region, and he just joined Microsoft directly, and it was a BStock team, right?
But did you study computer science?
I got my bachelor's from computer science from Pakistan.
Yeah.
And then he joined Microsoft and worked on quite a few products, but mostly BStock, right? And like the infra, like was the...
I was at .NET Framework, CLR.
.NET CLR, yeah. And then he joined Amazon when I met him, and we worked together on the practically SDK part of the kind of the developer experience part of the framework. And it was pretty challenging because we practically were inventing this thing from the thin air. And I think Samar did an awesome job there. And then, we kind of went our own ways. And he didn't mention, but while he went to Microsoft, he actually tried to do something like simple workflow there. And he couldn't make it like top-level service, but he built a framework called Durable Task framework, which is still widely used and got adopted by functions team. So practically there is Amazon Azure Durable Functions product, which is based on that. And I think it's pretty successful inside of Microsoft and outside. And then, we met at Uber. And the interesting thing about both of us, we never managed a single person until we started the company. So both me and Samar were just engineers all our careers. And then, but it always was like I was more on a kind of purely technical side, but Samar was like really a manager of the product. I think at some point we lost a manager because of Cadence team, because he just didn't know what to do there, because Samar was taking care of everything. And but when we started the company, I was CEO and Samar was leading technical part. He was practically CTO, but all engineering and product reporting to him. And at some point I decided that I want to be a manager at all. And now I'm kind of the CTO, but without...
I believe that your exact words in the board meeting was, I realized one day I fucking hate this. So.
Yeah.
Okay, probably.
Like,
but
right.
I just don't like... I'm not a manager, right? I clearly love technology much more than people.
You can love both, but just one is even greater than the other.
So I'm curious. I'm sure we'll hit the CEO transition and all the organizational stuff and hiring later. But I'm really curious, how did you guys evolve from coming in to build the messaging system at Uber to ultimately designing and building and deploying Cadence there? How did that evolution happen? I don't think I've ever actually heard that story from you.
First thing, we actually were hired to replace Kafka. right? Uber, Kafka back then, I think Kafka 7 had issues. And at least at the scale Uber ran it. And they just decided to replace it, and they hired us. And we built a product which was called Jeremy, which was had quite a few pretty interesting ideas. And at some point, I think around 60 use cases were running on that within Uber. So it became pretty successful. And the main differentiator was, besides reliability, because we never lost messages. I think the only time we had message loss was somebody by mistake deleted a queue in production. So, but and then we later added permissions. But we never had data loss, and I think it was significant. And also, it was proper queue. Like Kafka still is not a queue; they're trying to get there, but it is a streaming platform. And we built proper queue and had all sorts of interesting features and scalability. It was pretty scalable. But at some time, Kafka actually became better, and companies just defunded the product. But what happened is that because we were building it for very large scale, we needed to do background jobs practically to do processing of kind of just a lot of background processing on that cluster. And we were thinking how to do that, and Samar just said, why? We know how to do that. It just, we did simple workflow. Why we don't create something like that? And initially it was kind of just to be a backend part of the queuing system. And we started to work on that project, and at some point we kind of realized that it's worth actually giving to other developers within Uber and outside. And also one of the reasons I joined Uber versus like going back to Amazon was that Uber let us do it as an open source project. And practically we built these queuing systems as an open source project, but we made one mistake. We actually built it and then said, okay, let's open source that. Took us half a year, full time, I think 1 or 2 developers, just to remove all the internal dependencies and get it to the point when it was open sourceable. It was a huge effort. So when we started to work on Cadence, we from the beginning said, no, we are going to develop that in the open source, in the open from the beginning, because doing it afterwards is much, much more complicated. And that project, if you look at practically from the beginning, all development was happening in the open. And that's why kind of it started to pick up internal adoption, then external adoption, right? So
why was it important for you to open source it? And maybe you just answered it with the last part.
First, we never actually did it to start a company. We actually never discussed starting a company before Lenny talked to us. It's true. It's like we absolutely were oblivious to the whole ecosystem of companies. And I didn't know practically any venture funds. I didn't know any names, and it was just was new for me. And we never discussed that. But I always believed that infrastructure software has to be open source. Why? Because at Amazon, like imagine Amazon in the beginning 2000s. Amazon already had scale, which most companies don't even have right now. And they were hitting all the scaling issues, like big time back then. And they came up with awesome solutions for them. And Amazon created quite a few interesting technologies internally, including that messaging platform we are talking about, which was conceived like years before Kafka was conceived and was in production. But because it was internal, we never released any of that open source. With time, these technologies became obsolete because it's very hard to keep working and improving the product inside of the company, because people build it, they move on, and like a company never will invest 100 people into like some internal infrastructure project. And it became clear that with time, all these technologies were replaced by other technologies or by open source technologies. And I believe that if company is building something, it needs to build it open source because it should have its own life. Otherwise, with time, it will become obsolete. And I think it's a very good example, like Temporal is a technology which clearly much more useful beyond a single company. And right now, the investment we are getting and the amount of resources we are putting into that would be absolutely impossible in any other settings. We've got so much funding that no company would ever invest in a single like internal product that much money.
Yep. So let's talk about Temporal. You mentioned you met Lenny, talked about commercializing Cadence, and you've done a phenomenal job at that. We talked about both of your experiences in depth. What did you learn from those experiences in building early Temporal? I know that you forked Cadence and began building, but tell me a little bit about the initial code, initial vision for what Temporal could be.
So as you can imagine, I think the story goes way before Cadence.
Yep.
So both of us, for me personally, when I joined Max at Amazon in the Simple Workflow team, I think Max himself was coming from the whole messaging background. So he saw firsthand, like a company, when they go through this journey of Amazon, by the way, started with a single monolith. Like the entire website, like it used to take a whole day to build the binary which runs the website essentially. And of course, this is back then very early Amazon days, and Amazon would never be a company if they still operated like that. So then they decided to go after the whole service-oriented architectures. And this is where messaging just became such a core primitive when you are building those service-oriented architectures. But although the primitive works to deliver like the scalability, reliability, and all of those things, but it's the user experience, developer experience is not there yet. It's, yes, Amazon, there are very few companies on the planet like Amazons of the world who have access to that top tier talent, who can basically work with those low level primitives. Because what we saw is people are building their operating system first before really layering their application on top of it. So the whole premise of back then is, can we simplify this thing? And this is where Simple Workflow was our first attempt. I think we in that first attempt, we purely went from a perspective of a scalable engine, like build that core engine to power that platform. One big learning for us in that first attempt is I don't think we ever hit the right developer experience to attract developers to build powerful applications on top of that platform. So at least for me, Max, that was the big learning during the Simple Workflow days is I didn't think we were able to nail the developer experience back then. So for me, then like my next attempt when I was at Microsoft Azure, I ended up in the Azure Service Bus team. And I firsthand saw the exact same story now playing out at Azure when they were getting their cloud footing, essentially, is how core of a role messaging plays in those kind of platforms. So this time I took the opposite approach. Rather than focusing on the backend, I just figured out back then like C# added this async await primitives, which turned out to be ideal primitives essentially for kind of a developer experience we should be targeting. So for me, my next attempt is rather than focusing on the backend, can I figure out the right developer experience and then this is where I felt just having an easy enough developer experience to attract developers, we were start getting so much adoption, essentially, organically bottoms up because of that.
How do you validate that to begin with? Is it just you have good developer intuition because you are a developer, or are you said people adopt it because there was a good developer experience. How do you create a good developer experience? What does that take?
So, probably a digression, but it's a funny story, by the way. Yeah.
We love funny stories.
Yeah. So, I spent my first 10 years in a professional career was at Microsoft. I worked in a bunch of teams there. So I was part of a team at Microsoft, which was codenamed Oslo. I worked with some of the smartest engineers as part of that team. So they were chartered with the mission is, can we make developer experience 10x better? Yeah. And the approach they took was, can we figure out, there's those smart people sit in a room, whiteboard all sorts of ideas essentially on how can we make developer experience 10x better. And I was part of the Oslo effort also. I think they were in a room for 2 years designing those systems, building those out. The first time they put in front of a customer, I think they have, Microsoft has that developer conference. So the first time they went out a customer, one comment stuck with me is, this looks like such a cool technology. I don't know where to use it. And so this is where basically one of the things I feel Microsoft is an amazing company, but at the same time, like iterating something with developers and listening to customers is not the skill set that they have, essentially. This is something Amazon is amazing at, in my opinion. So for us, coming back to your question now, is that developer experience. One of the unique skill set both me and Max have is we have never been in positions of power. We've been growing system bottoms up, working on real problems and solving real use cases. So for me, for durable task framework is just work with the developer. What problem you have? Go back, come up with a solution, and then can that developer solve that problem using the solution that I'm providing? That was the unit of success. That's how I measured success, is like how many applications are being powered by the platform that we are providing to a developer. One of the interesting things that I feel that is such a cultural thing here at Temporal also today is each and every feature in the platform, both probably me and Max can go back and point out to a real outage or real developer ask, essentially, is why that feature exists. Exactly. It came from a real problem. This is where even we feel our community that we have built around open source Temporal today is such a unique place because of that trait that both of us have been demonstrating throughout the...
That's awesome. I mean, I know I took us away from the question, which is sort of what were your learnings from all of these past experiences? So it sounds like one of them is developer experience is king.
It is the king. Yeah, especially for a application platform. At the end of the day, it's are you solving the right problems and can you explain it easily to a developer and can they get onboarded quickly and then use your platform to solve those problems.
How about on more of the technical design? So when you set out to build Temporal, what kind of technical trade-offs were you making?
So we had to make, for example, like not a technical, for example, I think Max touched like open source, for instance, was one of the, like, especially starting the company on an open source project from day one, we had absolute clarity. For a platform like us, for like Temporal, because the life, it needs to have its own life.
I mean, I was going to say, it sounds like philosophically, Max, you believed this within the large company too, that infrastructure should be open source.
Yes, because even for a very large company, again, it's not the focus of the company. It never will be a long-term project. At some point, it will just like look at Google. They never open sourced MapReduce, and I still believe that MapReduce inside of Google is better as any external alternative, but still they weren't able to influence market, right? They kind of look from inside, look at the open source implementation MapReduce, and they cringe, but they cannot do anything about that because their code never was written to be open sourced, right? Like they have practically the same thing about Borg, right? Like internally they use Borg, but externally they practically had to create a completely different platform called Kubernetes, which doesn't scale at all, right? Comparing to Borg, right? Like Borg scales very, very well, but again, it never was written to be open sourced, and they think it's a problem for them, right? Like that these platforms are not really, they cannot really monetize them outside. They cannot really influence the developers outside. They have kind of lived with this split brain, right? Like internal and external.
Yeah. So it makes sense. There's this the sort of cultural decision to be very focused on developer experience. You can call it a technical decision. You could call it a business strategy to invest in open source. What were some of the other technical design decisions that you made?
We had a lot, right? It's just this like framework, especially developer experience of that. It wasn't that we dreamed it overnight. Like we had, I wrote probably 3 frameworks at Amazon. The initial ones were actually pretty similar to what industry been using before. That more like traditional kind of workflow engine type style things, which is just create a graph or create a like abstract syntax tree in your code, or this is sequence, this is conditional node, this is like a parallel node, this is like a loop node and like try catch node, and you compose them and it kind of works. It worked, but at the end it was so ugly. It was so just experience wasn't good, and especially troubleshooting. Like there's so many issues. And then we've got this idea which we call durable execution now. That is, why we just cannot make normal code durable. And I think there was a revelation which actually didn't come up immediately, but it took some time for us to realize. And then we just started to think how to do it technically. And the way it was done at a simple workflow wasn't good enough, right? Because reality is nobody's using simple workflow out there, because that experience had so many rough edges that people just didn't want to go over them. And at Uber, we actually, and with experience Samar at Microsoft with Durable Task framework, and then what we did at Uber, we finally got to the point and experience was actually simple enough and good enough and like intuitive enough that people were able to adopt that pretty fast. And it didn't have, obviously everything has rough edges, but it didn't have like that many rough edges that it would preclude people from using that.
So it's interesting. When we were doing early diligence on Cadence, one of the most typical refrain we would hear is like, "Oh, this looks cool and it's a little bit different, but I'm at a company and we've built 3 of these kinds of systems. We have 3 of these workflow engines. We build all these state machines by hand." So I'm curious, Barr is getting at, Max, like what are the couple design decisions? What are the couple characteristics of Temporal and or early Cadence that make it more than just a workflow engine, right? The code first design is one of them, but what are some of the other characteristics that you would point to that say, well, there's the workflow engine, right? There's the Airflows of the world or the simple workflow services, and then there's Temporal.
I think the developer experience is the most important one, so that you write code and you get this durable execution thing, because I think that is the most important one, because code is infinitely not scalable around what. It's like you can scale complexity of the code practically infinitely, right? We have systems written which have hundreds of millions of lines of code.
Max, do you want to just define durable execution since it's such a core part?
Okay, durable execution is, think about code which cannot crash, crashless code. So what it means is that you execute some function, let's say this function calls some API, blocks on that API call, and then process which hosts this function crashes. And later, when reply comes back, maybe 3 days later, we resurrect that function in exactly the same state, still blocked on that API call with all variables preserved, and then we just give it a result. So from the developer point of view, this function was just waiting on that API call for 3 days, and nothing happened. So practically, from your point of view, there is no crash. So we make it crashless from the developer point of view. Obviously, behind the scenes, we move it around, we passivate, activate that, but it's all handled seamlessly. From your point of view, you just get code which cannot crash, which means that you can write a function which runs for a year, right? So you can, if you want to do subscription, you can write for loop 0 to 12, then sleep 30 days, charge, send email. Obviously, sleep should be recalculated every time, but you get the idea. And run this function for a year. And you can write production code like that. And I think this is a completely different way to even think about software, because if you preserve the full state, and also because state is preserved, you don't need database. You can just put stuff in a local variable or like field of your object, and it's there. So no object relational mapping, no database, just no like timers, because it just can call sleep, no cron jobs, just a function. And then you have a system which can run billion of them in parallel, and it's efficient. That is kind of what you get.
I love it. I took us off, but developer experience, durable execution.
Yeah, and then there is other parts, which is these things. Durable execution is an abstraction, right? The same way, for example, transaction is an abstraction. And there are thousands databases, all they have transactions. Some of them are useless, some of them are not very good databases, some of them are like Postgres of the world, right? And the same thing is there. Durable execution is an abstraction which allows to hide complexity from developer and move most of the complexity of distributed system in the underlying system. So Temporal is an implementation, is open source, MIT license implementation of durable execution, which implements a lot of, takes over complexity of distributed systems. Internally, it's all asynchronous, queue-based, system with durable timers and which can scale almost infinitely. And again, we don't know the limit, but so far we didn't find the limit. It's always database. Like we sit on top of database, bigger database, like system itself can scale out. And that is what power of Temporal is. Like through durable execution, we allow to hide complexity from developer, because any other attempt to do that is leaky. All these other abstractions are leaky, because if you think about it, the current state of the industry, it's about patterns, right? What is a pattern? Pattern is, oh, you have all these Lego blocks. This is how you assemble your solution out of these Lego blocks. But these Lego blocks are very leaky abstractions, right? You still need to understand low-level components. You need to understand queues, databases, state management, crash recovery, right? Like break your logic in 50 callbacks because you cannot just write function which calls 5 APIs. In Temporal, if you need to call 5 APIs and guarantee the execution, you just call 5 APIs and it guarantees its execution. But the moment you need to guarantee execution of 5 APIs in any other way, it becomes 10 times more, 100 times, 1,000 times more complicated, especially at scale. So that is what it does. It's just that developer experience plus actual system which can guarantee that execution and be super, super reliable and scalable.
Yeah, I mean, durable execution, it sounds really nice. It's challenging under the surface. What's the biggest technical challenge that you faced in early days of Temporal?
I think technical challenge was that reliability and resiliency. And like real technical challenge was, but we actually decided to use Cassandra as an underlying storage. And Cassandra is a very sharp tool. So it's a very good tool, but at the same time, it's a very sharp tool. It's very easy to cut yourself. And I remember Samar spent probably a quarter trying to make it work. And finally it worked, but it required a lot of like low-level understanding how it works and engineering and so on and workarounds. So yeah, I think that was the hardest one. And then the rest was just around developer experience because the first SDK we wrote was Go SDK. So we had to kind of invent new things. How, for example, do durable execution for blocking calls. Because the original version in the simple workflow was fully asynchronous. And Samar did await async stuff, which was asynchronous. But Go is not the language which embraces async. So if you go to the Go developers and say, here's the fully asynchronous framework, they will just, it's not natural. So yeah, we wanted to do something which is natural to Go developers, which means you need to be able to block your Go routine and wait for something. And we practically had to come up with the way to do that, which actually wasn't available. And then we did it for Java because, again, the simple workflow code was in Java and was fully asynchronous. And then we found a way to do it synchronous, like invocations in Java, and block there for 3 days, actually, for a week, which is an awesome developer experience. That's why actually people like that SDK much more than we had before.
Yeah. So this is, by the way, a technology like we've been iterating over for now almost 16 years now. And it has went through a lot of evolution, lot of learning for both of us. To like Max's point, like at Uber, like we were kind of forced into using Cassandra. And then we eventually need to build a queue. Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, if you do a Google search on how to build a queue using Cassandra, the first article there is don't build a queue on Cassandra. And because like if you are doing random deletes, essentially, Cassandra is not a technology which can be built for queuing, but eventually like we had to struggle but we had to architect our way around that limitation. And we were able to successfully use Cassandra for building a queue on top of it to power task queue semantics. But like over time, for instance, like at Uber had this thing called ride as reliable as running water. And the reliability was a very core tenet, but running any mission critical system at Uber. So which basically meant that any tier 1 or tier 2 service at Uber needs to be operated out of 2 different data centers, essentially. It can fail over at a moment's notice to power out of a different data center if one of the data center goes down. So especially building a system which very high consistency semantics, we had to build actually our own replication stack on how do we replicate Cadence essentially at Uber across to power it out of multiple data center and still keep highly consistent semantics essentially. So that was actually one of the very hard problems that we had to solve. And by the way, that all of that actually exists in our open source today with Temporal too. And then like at the end of the day, if I have to, at a very high level, as Max said, what is temporal, what is durable execution? It comes down to really 2 key pieces of innovation for us. One very clear differentiator is the programming model that we have layered for any developer. So this is where both me and Max are not against DSLs, but building a DSL which is Turing complete and then using it to represent any logic is not good developer experience. We have seen it again and again, like any graph-based solutions and all of those things. It's a fallacy where people fall into. It looks simple. Yes, it's simple, but at the same time, no one is building a Linux kernel using a graph-based solution. They use programming languages or different paradigms, which scales with complexity. So I think so this is why, even though it cost us, we want to meet developers where they are today. So that's why we have SDKs in 7 languages, and the very native programming model that we have layered for those developers to compose those applications is pretty core aspect of the whole durable execution programming model. But at the end of the day, this, as Max said, reliable, building an event loop which can scale to billions of those executions without those developers thinking about all of those tiny details. That's the message pump that we have built underneath the cover, which is highly reliable, highly fault tolerant, which can tolerate, and even in a whole data center going down, where your application will have availability, that's the core piece essentially.
When you say data center, just to make sure for people understand, we are talking about region, like if you use Amazon terminology, right? Not AZ. We are talking about like multi-region replication here.
When I think about Temporal, ultimately you guys are building a reliability platform for code, making code crash proof. That's an exercise in understanding edge cases of distributed systems, and the amount of know-how that you need to have to architect a system like that is, I think, what makes this really non-trivial. I don't know if this is going to sidetrack the conversation or take us maybe a little bit into the future, but we've started to hear more about durable execution in the last 6 months, and it's really coming from a lot of these companies that are now building agent frameworks. And I think what people are realizing is that building agents is ultimately async programming. It's ultimately about building workflows. And there you need to have a durable execution engine. So we've just started to hear that term much more now than when you guys were coming around. Talk to us about agents.
Yeah. What are you all hearing?
I think there is this, I think there was an article from Anthropic which practically differentiated workflows and agents, right? And it kind of makes sense to saying, okay, this is fixed workflow and agent is dynamic, right? And when I say workflow, I usually, first, if I say workflow, I always mean durable execution, right? Just because for me, it's just code. And code is inherently very dynamic. So when I say workflow and durable execution, there is no differentiation. Like you practically can write code which calls 5 functions in a row, but you can write code which reads list of function names and still executes them in a loop, and it will be also valid code. And if you run inside of Temporal, it will be durable. So there is no really difference for those requirements. And I think it's very important because most of these agentic loops and like agentic use cases are always mixture of very dynamic code and more or less fixed code, right? Like look something like deep research. Deep research is about, okay, there are fixed steps. Okay, ask questions, then determine which queries to run a bunch of queries, like determine new data sources, and then summarize that. So there is some sequence of steps. At the same time, there are a lot of dynamic steps, right? Like, okay, go to LLM, ask what searches to run them in parallel. And if you try to represent them any other way, like then code, it becomes very hard, right? Like if you represent like a graph, you need to cheat, right? You either need to have a node which runs the searches in parallel, or like have node which contains an agentic loop, which is just code. But you cannot have a graph which kind of represents, for example, LLM call and tool call as separate nodes, because then how many tools are you going to call, right? Which tools are you going to call? In code, it's trivial. So practically, we found that you can code your like agentic logic in code very, very well. And then other thing is that the magic of durable execution is that, for example, in Python SDK, it's just normal Python code, sync.io code. And if you look at existing frameworks out there, which don't care about durability, they just want to implement the AI logic. For example, OpenAI SDK, agentic SDK, it's just Python code. It's a very smart Python code which kind of understands LLM semantic, understands the rules, understands how to do tool calling, but at the end, it's just Python code. So you can take that code and practically put inside of Temporal workflow, and it runs. There are certain rules you need to follow and certain adjustments, but mostly it runs as it is. And that's why, for example, we're able to easily integrate with OpenAI Agentic SDK. And when we say integrate, all it means is that you can just take practically OpenAI agent and run inside of workflow, and it's kind of magically becomes durable. So it and what we mean by durable is that your process can crash anytime. It will recover state and continue. And you also can parallelize that. You can run a lot of them in parallel. And then you can do all integrations, because it's not only just run an agent. It needs to have manual steps. It needs to be able to communicate with external world. It needs to react to external events. Through Temporal, this is easy because it's just core parts of the platform. So I think the main kind of short version of that is all these agents are just workflows, right? Sometimes very dynamic workflows, but still workflows. And the only way to represent them sanely is through code. But if you want a code to be durable, use durable execution. And Temporal is the best platform for that. And it's not coming from us. It actually came from our users. Like we actually, for the first 2 years of all this AI craze, we were just sitting doing our own thing. Like, I don't know, payment transactions, customer onboarding, like infrastructure automation, data pipelines. We didn't think about AI much. But then people came to us and said, guys, we are using for like agentic use cases, and we are looking at that, oh, wow, it's becoming the trend. So like now we are kind of starting to think maybe we need to help them and do more integrations. But at the end, I wouldn't be surprised that we run more production AI workloads, at least for like agents, we should need durability than any other company, besides without having AI in our kind of moniker.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask, because it sounds like some of it was just you were doing your thing and customers were saying, we're using this for some agentic use cases.
So people who know Temporal, they immediately, it clicks for them.
It clicks for them, yeah.
Like if they know Temporal and they see agentic use case, they're like, okay, this makes sense. The only problem right now that people who don't know Temporal, they just don't think about Temporal when implementing that. They probably need to check that out before.
Since you all had this aha moment, like this is a really good fit for AI agents, what does that look like in terms of your product roadmap? Or it sounds like in what you just said, there's an element of marketing to the people who may not know Temporal yet and are building agents. But in terms of actual product, what, if anything, changes to support agentic workflows?
So we do have gaps in the product today, which we are actually have a very aggressive roadmap to kind of address those. For example, one today, if you are working with an LLM, essentially, the concept of streaming. So today, for instance, we don't have very direct support for streaming as part of the core platform. People can work around it, but there is no straightforward way which exists in the platform today. So it's part of our roadmap to add those. Another big area that if you go and talk to our customers today, how they are leveraging the platform, what we find out is they use us a lot by manipulating data. So it's not inference or it's not something else, essentially. It's about we need to build these connectors to bring in these set of data from diverse sources or APIs, which they can fail in a reliable fashion. So this is another big area. Is today Temporal is an awesome platform, to use as a control plane, but it's not a big data solution. And so that's another area for focus, is that especially in the agentic space, people are dealing with big data. And how Temporal could be a more natural fit for those big data use cases is another pretty something which is top of mind for us, essentially.
Yeah, definitely. We talked about this earlier, the getting data from a bunch of different APIs, a lot of unstructured data as well. How do you bring it together for?
So I think those, but at the to Max's point is, if you rewind the clock back, we saw so many similarities with when Amazon was moving from a monolith to a service-oriented architecture. They needed a core backbone, essentially. And it forced them to now solve distributed systems problem, and which kind of gave birth to queues or simple workflow and all of those technologies. Same thing at Uber. Uber, like any other startup, started with a monolith, and then once at some point they needed to scale, and they start moving into microservices architecture. Cadence became the orchestrator for orchestrating calls across microservices. Because at the end of the day, you need to solve the exact same distributed systems problems, essentially, and how to build those things reliably and stitch those things together. And I think that's exactly similar transition happening. Whereas now, as these LLMs, there is a new insanely powerful tool available for every developer on the planet, which is as these models are getting smarter and smarter, people are now building these class of applications which are going to get more mission critical, which are going to get more long running, more asynchronous, and at the end of the day, and they need to solve the exact same set of distributed systems problem. And this is where I think something like durable execution or Temporal essentially kind of gives them core platform as the world now scales and this whole application ecosystem starts showing up. I think Temporal or durable execution is very sweetly positioned to kind of capture on that.
I think we've always talked about kind of this taxonomy of the application landscape where there's very simple request response apps, and for everything else there's temporal. Agents are very quickly very much in that second category. They're a brand new architecture, but they are the new way. This is the dominant greenfield architecture that's emerging, and it just so happens that it's a perfect fit for temporal. Even though maybe you guys would argue that any application that's backendy that has any state that you're dealing with is a good fit for temporal. Is there something particular to agents that make them a really, really good fit to be built on temporal?
I think agents are just distributed systems, right? There is nothing magical about them. Magical is LLM is magical, right? Like there is no question about it. And they're more dynamic. I think they are more dynamic, but at the end they are distributed systems. I think most people still don't realize that because LLMs are not good enough and to be really useful yet. And what happens is that people spend most of the time thinking about how to create better prompt, right? And how like do my evals, how do I guarantee that it will produce reasonable results? But imagine we get LLM which actually does produce good results. And then you need to put it in production. And I can guarantee you it will be exactly the same problems you will face with any other distributed systems, but maybe again, much more dynamic invocation of APIs versus more static invocation of APIs. And this is exactly what durable execution solves, and we've been solving for like 16 years, is that exactly that, is how do we solve problem of building large-scale, reliable distributed systems, right? And what agents make it is like there will be just more of those, more moving parts. Right, like we are talking about just increasing the number of moving parts, and I think Temporal is one of the. Frankly, I don't know if there is any other solution in the market which can scale at that to be scalable to that level, to these levels.
I think, Lenny, you're absolutely right. Like, I think a whole agentic AI space is the ideal application for a platform like Temporal, and because of few characteristics. The first of is these agentic. I think because of all of the enhancements on AI side of things, now these models are getting interesting to a point where they can make decisions. And which is powering this new generation of applications now, which are very highly valuable for a lot of companies or organizations out there. So first of all, the total number of scale of transactions which will be powered by these applications is going to be insanely large, what this world has ever seen before. So for a platform like Temporal, which thrives on those transactions, that's why this whole agentic AI is an ideal app for us, is because it brings the volume of transactions which we have never seen before. And this is the thing which we get really, really excited about, is the platform that we've been building and nurturing it for such a long period of time has suddenly found its ideal application out there.
Right. I mean, our scaling mechanism for the business has always been kind of the number of users an application that runs on us has.
Yeah.
Now, right, that user becomes a machine powering all these transactions. So, a mid-sized company that's agent-oriented can have potentially the scale that you guys saw at Uber now.
100%, exactly. So now, like this problem is now in everyone's face, essentially. So this is where people need like a reliable backbone to power them, because like you can build a very highly valuable app, but if that app fails all the time, like it serves no purpose, essentially.
I know we talk a little bit about competition, but thinking about being the orchestration engine for agentic apps is some of the most strategic real estate out there right now. There's a lot of well-funded competition. It's on everyone's, it's in everyone's crosshairs. How do you guys kind of chalk up or dice up the landscape of available solutions today, and without naming names potentially, how how do you think about positioning Temporal within that, within that broader ecosystem?
I'm going to add a part 2 to that question, which is we talked a lot about developer empathy, developer experience. Does this ecosystem change the type of developer that you're spending time with as well? For example, there are many AI engineers or et cetera that are building these agentic workflows. We'll add that as a double header.
So you are mainly more focused on the orchestration piece or the more broader umbrella?
Whether you call it orchestration, whether you call it like an agentic runtime, basically to be the harness for the infrastructure layer for agents.
Let's come from the user perspective. Yeah. So for us, at least the way we slice and dice this thing is we have absolute clarity on the persona of that Temporal is going after. So we are a company who just obsess about developer experience, and especially professional developers. So for us, at least the way we slice and dice, there are many kind of solutions now in the market. Especially it's Myriad, as you said, it's a humongous market, and it's really like a big space for people to, and there's a lot of value to capture there. So at least one way to slice and dice is people having clarity on what kind of persona or they are going after. So I think there are definitely a spectrum of low code, no code, essentially there, or people, or let's say non-developers, vibe code, exactly. So there is definitely that space there where I think, which is actually pretty exciting for someone like us, is because a company like Temporal, at the end of the day, it thrives on how many developers are users of the platform. And if that ecosystem gets wider and wider, essentially, it's going to be a big, gigantic tailwind for Temporal. So for us, rather than like, I think we had absolute clarity that we go after professional developers who are building these large scale applications, essentially. And as these developers start adopting agentic AI for a wide spectrum of use cases out there, Temporal is just like a skill set, a muscle that they have built. And they, as Max pointed out earlier, if they have already worked with Temporal, it's such an amazing fit. We don't even have to explain them. They are already picking Temporal for those use cases, essentially. So having like slicing and dicing it from the perspective of professional developers versus wipe coders versus IT people, essentially. So we are strictly focused on professional developers right now.
If you look at the industry, there are a lot of frameworks, right? And what frameworks are? Frameworks is practically just data structures, right? And integrations about like usually integrations of different API calls. And then on top of that, there are attempts to do some sort of DSLs, practically how we compose these things together. And the reality is that most companies and most serious developers, they don't like those DSLs because they're very limiting. And people there is the whole movement of, okay, let's just build our application directly, just making API calls directly, or just use some kind of common libraries for integrations, but people don't like heavyweight, very strict ways to do things. Also, frameworks in general are relatively easy to write. That's why we have, I don't know how many agentic frameworks we have right now, probably thousands or tens of thousands already. Everyone writes its own agentic framework. So for me, agentic framework becomes more like application framework, right? You have hundreds of different applications and application frameworks. And I think if you look at all of them, the durability and guarantee of execution is either not there at all or it's afterthought, right? It's they are trying to do that, but they're just using ideas from like 80s, right? Like, okay, let's use a graph to represent my workflow, like a DAG. It worked like in the 80s and 90s, but this is like obsolete technology the moment you learn about durable execution, right? Because these things are not dynamic, they cannot do proper error handling. You like there are so many like data, like you use, everything is global if you use a graph, right? Because everything is a hash map. So it's just not like you're trying to do like implement program in like something very, very limiting. And there is not much benefit, especially if you just cannot fit use cases directly there. And these things don't do durability very well. And practically, my point is that from temporal point of view, we solve the hard problem. Hard problem is how to make sure that your system runs reliably and doesn't fail if there are like process crashes and other outages, or LLMs are not very reliable in terms of API calls, so you need to retry and all these things. So we're kind of the glue of these things. What framework you use, we are very agnostic to that. You might not use any framework because technically to write agentic loop in temporal will take you like 1 hour from scratch, and we have a lot of samples for that. Or you can use something like OpenAI Agentic SDK, when you can take a robust industry framework and run on top of temporal without practically no changes. And we actually welcomed any framework to integrate with temporal. And just recently, Pedantic AI announced that they are integrated with temporal as well. So you can run Pedantic now, OpenAI on your own. And I'm pretty sure there will be more integrations. They're actually going to publish documentation how to do proper integration with temporal. So our strategy is not like become just another kind of AI framework, which we technically could write. But why? Because again, I think there are so many ways to do that. It's kind of like, I don't know, JavaScript frameworks. Everybody invents their own. And we just want to support all of them. And I think if you are writing your own framework, think about, okay, at some point, somebody will ask me, I need to guarantee execution. I want to have ambient agents. I want to make sure that these agents keep running in presence of failures. And think, can you implement that reliably and at scale? And I think people usually greatly underestimate the complexity of doing that. And that's why temporal can come almost any other company, and like all homegrown solutions around state management and like orchestration usually are replaced by temporal the moment developers get familiarity with it. So I think this is what happens in the agentic space, right? Like our strategy is do the hard thing. Hard thing is durability and guarantees and being able to write code, and let others to innovate around these agentic frameworks, data structures, and like evals and all these things. And we will just be the kind of robust engine which can run any of them.
Yeah. Do what you do best and apply it.
Yeah,
here.
I think we just, there is other part which we are investing heavily is interprocess communication. We have this project we call Nexus RPC. And the idea is that right now in the industry, you have RPC services there are two types of services. There are RPC services and async services, right? So RPC services have nice interfaces. They can have like gRPC type description. They can have other IDLs which describe the interfaces. They usually talk for HTTP or some other protocol, but it's request reply. It's very simple, very well defined. It's easy to write them. The problem is the moment you say, I need to guarantee execution, or my request can take longer than a few seconds, you practically have to abandon all of that and go to PubSub or event-driven system, which means no APIs. You see, like all messages are global. And your logic should be broken a bunch of callbacks. You also need persistence into the database to checkpoint your state. So your experience becomes abysmal. Like first to write that and then maintain that. And with temporal, what we did, we said, okay, can we just maintain the RPC paradigm for long-running processes and guarantee execution, or like invocation? So imagine they can have RPC service, but your function can take 5 days. And then you also can check the status of the function, can cancel it, but it's still an RPC. And then you also guarantee that it will be called, right? So you don't need to think about retries and other things. It's all handled for you. So imagine, for example, if you're using OpenAI Agentic SDK integration with temporal, you can call a tool, and this tool can take 5 days because it implements this temporal activity, right? Or like child workflow and like all this Nexus RPC. So practically, we are moving to the next level. Then you can have long-running RPCs. And then the question is how you map those to things like MCP, because MCP doesn't have good support for long-running operations.
To better understand, regurgitate, the idea is you're moving this core durable execution abstraction into a protocol which allows you to take this notion of durability and apply it to within the network for different calls and APIs.
Yes. And it's not just about one process, it becomes about network of those processes, and it can communicate. And in agentic space, it means calling tools and calling other agents reliably, and these APIs can take a long time. So now you can have a tool which takes 5 days versus a tool which fails in a few seconds. And people try to work around this traditional, again, I certainly see a lot of advertisements from event-driven solutions when they say, "Oh, agents should be event-driven," which I don't agree. Agents don't understand events. Agents understand tools. Tools are RPC, right? Like tools is request reply, and LLM doesn't care if this tool takes 1 second or takes 5 days, because it technically says, "Call this thing, give me this result." And this Nexus RPC is an ideal fit for those use cases.
Yeah. And one of the places where we are seeing is we're very quickly seeing industry moving into a multi-agent world where, for example, like if you're booking a vacation, there is not one agent doing the entire vacation. There's an agent which is specialized in doing hotels, your hotel booking. There is one agent which is specializes in basically doing your airline reservation or activities that you want to do, essentially. So which means that something like Nexus is how you tie all of those agents together, essentially, which can be more longer lived. So especially as the world kind of moves into more into multi-agent, as these protocols like MCP, which looks like still kind of figuring out their footing, because these agents need to do more and more longer lived operations, or more asynchronous, essentially. And so something like Nexus can bridge that gap.
It's interesting. I'm also seeing more folks. There's sort of step one, which is you vibe code. Step two, can you actually productionize an agent? And then these multi-agent systems. You have a lot of experience expanding Temporal within organizations, within massive organizations. So they build like one workflow in Temporal, and then it may spread across the organization. Do you have a good sense when you land into a customer if that's going to happen? And is there an analogy in AI world where someone builds an agent and you have a sense that it's going to grow tremendously into a multi-agent system?
So that's a very interesting question. Let me go over some statistics on Temporal side first. Like we were talking earlier, we are almost in the 6th year of building the company. We have even our code base of the company is actually less than 6 years. The code base is over 8-9 years now, considering we started Cadence at Uber and worked on it for 3 years, and then we ended up forking off Cadence as Temporal essentially, and before starting the company. Especially this fiscal year, when we started this year, Temporal already has a lot of penetration in digital native companies. Companies where like both me and Max have spent our entire professional career solving these core hard distributed systems problems. So what ended up happening is any organization which is engineers are empowered to make technology decisions and allows bottoms up. Temporal has a lot of penetration within those organizations. So for example, organizations like Snap, organizations like Coinbase, or organizations like Netflix, they are very heavy users of the technology. Then, especially like last year, we actually started seeing a lot of adoption for Temporal in FinServes, or especially our banking sector. So we are talking to a very, especially for financial transactions or account onboarding, there are so many use cases. Something as simple as generating statements for all of your users on 1st of the month. It's a huge bad job that kicks off, but it's absolutely critical that it runs to its completion. Temporal provides lots of value for those kind of use cases. So FinServes is definitely another big segment for us. That has definitely emerged last year. What we have started to, so we started this fiscal year with almost 200 plus strategic accounts. Strategic accounts is the way we define it is any organization which has 1,500 plus employees or $1 billion plus of revenue. We kind of basically qualify them as a strategic account, where we believe that over a longer period of time, we can win many workloads in that organization. And then, especially last year, we had a very heavy focus on bringing on like small and medium businesses or startups. We have a startup program where when you sign up, we give you like some amount of credits for your first year of usage for Temporal. So, and then we heavily invested into our onboarding experience where you can just sign up, put in your credit card, and then able to sign up for the service and start partying on top of the platform without even talking to any human.
So some of it's very bottoms up, get to the startups and then grow with them. Some of it is you get into these massive orgs and you spread across workloads over time. And then it sounds like another part that you talked about earlier is folks who are already using Temporal are interested in agents, and so they're starting to build these agent applications. Then I guess part 4 would be multi-agent systems. So what are you seeing in that transition?
So right now, essentially what we see, basically there are 3 category of use cases that we, at least at a high level. Greenfields, which is typically new initiatives any organization is taking off. So what we see is, for example, like earlier last year, when we were in digital natives or financial kind of institutions, it's rarely a greenfield initiative. They have a problem with an existing system, like modernization effort, for instance. So we typically qualify those either modernization or brownfield applications. That's what we see a lot last year. And then, of course, the third category for us is migrations, where people are already leveraging our open source out there for a wide variety of use cases. And then at some point, they decide to run that on top of cloud rather than self-hosting Temporal themselves. So the big difference for us this year is there is a lot of activity, especially in agentic space, which is greenfields right now. And this is where we see 2 big patterns. In our existing book of business, which is now we have over like 3,000, 4,000 customers who are customers of Temporal Cloud right now. And people who have already seen the technology, when they embark on those greenfield or newer agentic applications, Temporal is just like an default for them. So we are now seeing a lot of those agentic greenfield use cases, which, by the way, show up really, really fast on top of the platform and starts driving consumption. We are a consumption-based business, so this is where it's super attractive area for us. Is typically modernization efforts takes a lot of time because people need to be careful when they are basically modernizing an existing application.
Now they just build.
Yeah, and so it typically it takes months and months of engineering and testing effort before they start move that workload on top of Temporal Cloud. But those greenfields show up really quickly because there is no baggage associated with it, and these actually right now those agentic application is growing like wildfire also. So it drives consumption faster also.
I would say historically, when I talk about Temporal, what makes this company, you guys, more unique than any other infrastructure company that I've worked with before is that the use cases that we're winning are not the side business, right? They're not stateless web apps. They're not like OLAP jobs that can run in the background. Like the applications that are being replatformed on Temporal are the core business applications. So these app modernization initiatives are very high stakes. And the way that's manifested in our business is the time to get a customer from onto Temporal and scaled on our cloud has been inordinately long because of those high stakes. Generally because they've been more brownfield or because you're, again, taking something that's core and growing it with us. Why AI this year, in my view, changed the shape of our business is because there is an absolute race to get out to AIify your business, to get these agents out, to not get left behind, and so it's completely, it's obviously inflected our business, allowed us to grow a whole lot faster. Or I'm curious, like if you guys see the time to get to a scaled agentic app versus a time to get to scale like a core payments transaction or something like that. Like, are you guys measuring those deltas, and how much faster are the AI applications moving?
As you can imagine, that delta is very different depending on the organization that you talk to. But in general, we hear a lot on average, roughly 30 to 40% developer productivity wins or time to market faster if you are building those agentic systems on top of Temporal rather than hand rolling your own basically state machines out there or leveraging any other platform. And so as you said, so the whole power, the interesting thing for the platform is, although we got this early adoption from an engineer who has 10 plus years of experience of building distributed systems, those are the ones who are able to relate to the technology immediately that, this, whatever they've been like building those event-driven systems was completely undifferentiated work. I would rather offload that problem to a platform like Temporal to handle for them and then and focus on real meaningful value that they are creating for their own domains rather than roll out their own hand-rolled system. But the real unlock is for those early stage startups who don't have those resources. And this is where, at least right now, as more and more of the word is getting out, so that's marketing is a big challenge for us. And especially it's all about awareness. As more and more developers are getting aware of a technology like Temporal, we especially like startups, like we have over 400 plus startups who are running on top of Temporal right now. Like their core systems are built from ground up on top of Temporal right now.
And it's not only in the agentic space. In general, we have very good value proposition for startups because you build faster, you don't build infrastructure, just use Temporal if you use it out of the box. So your developer productivity is much better. And then if you scale practically to any scale, you don't need to rewrite your code. And I think it's just something which is hard to beat. That's why like Y Combinator startups, like Sequoia startups, like there are quite a few, like obviously Amplify, like a lot of portfolio companies using that. So I think we get a lot of adoption from startups because it's just very hard to beat.
Okay, we've talked a lot about AI, agents, multi-agent systems, how startups are building greenfield AI. Probably the biggest name in AI right now is OpenAI, and they've publicly talked about using Temporal for things like Codex. So tell me a little bit about how that came to be.
I think first of all, one of our bigger strengths, once again, is developers. So as even from very early on when we started the company, every other week, me and Max will get a message from some ex-Uber engineer that, we loved working with Cadence. We are in this new place. And we miss Cadence, and we would love to basically implement Temporal in this new organization. That's actually been our core strength as a company, as people work with our platform. And even if they move around, they switch jobs, they bring the technology with them, essentially. And I think that's the whole genesis of Codex leveraging Temporal. Probably started where I think there were some engineers who joined OpenAI who had in the past have experience working with Temporal. And when they embarked on that journey, essentially where, just to describe how Codex uses us today is, so Codex is an awesome piece of technology where, as in basically, by the way, we leverage Codex ourselves also. We have like 7 SDKs. So we did an integration of Codex with our Java SDK. We have a bug we assigned to Codex. Codex works on it in the background and suggests PRs, which is reviewed by someone. And then when a user approves it, it gets merged automatically. So we have AI working, fixing bugs in our Java SDK through Codex, essentially. Yeah. We are ourselves Temporal customers, yeah. So I think now if you think about it, it's actually what Codex is an agent which is longer lived, which is very asynchronous, which is taking inputs from an actual human, essentially, as it's suggesting fixes. And then it's pretty core part of mission critical, especially for a developer organization like our Java SDK team heavily leverages, have dependency on Codex, for instance. So all of those characteristics, when that engineer saw, like Temporal was just such an amazing fit for orchestrating that long running agent, essentially.
did you have core learnings from Temporal powering Codex, or does this look like just a different flavor of what Temporal's doing in other systems?
In the specific case around Codex, probably one of the core learning is keep on focusing on the needs of the developers. And that's what we are finding out. As long as I know, like AI, especially agentic AI is a new term, a lot of problems that those people are facing is exactly old, that they have seen it in microservice orchestration or service-oriented architectures or event-driven systems, essentially. So one of our core learning is we are actually doubling down on the needs of core professional developers for like those set of problems, because all what is going to happen, AI is going to put those problems right in each and every developer's face as more and more mission critical applications moves to agentic AI.
You've been in many large organizations, Snap, Instacart, Datadog, et cetera. We didn't talk a lot about what it means to scale, what it demands of your organization. What's been the most challenging part of scaling? We talked about durability and its importance, but how do you scale with orgs? What have been some of the growing pains in doing that effectively?
So that's, by the way, the part where both of us has to go through a lot of learning, by the way, after starting the company. Especially both of us has never been people's manager. We have never really scaled organizations. So it's funny, like if you look at Temporal, we have come a long way from just the two of us to now we have close to 300 people in the company.
Yeah. It's so interesting because when I said scale, I actually meant from like a technology performance perspective, but it's very closely tied to scaling the team.
We knew how to scale technology for
a
very long time.
You've done it at Uber.
Right.
You've done it at
Amazon.
You've done it at Amazon.
Right. So I don't think it's a problem. I think organizational scaling and like finding the right people, like hiring always was like recruiting always like, and thanks you guys helped us at the beginning, right? But like hiring, I think the hardest one. And Samar as a CEO spent so much time in the executive hiring these days, right?
I mean, Lenny was there at the time, but what does it look like to get early hires? Who did you recruit as the very first people on board?
Yeah, whoever you can get, right? And because we started as a local company in Seattle, right? We are local to it was pre-COVID, right? And we always worked in offices. We never thought about creating a remote-only company. And we found out that people in Seattle don't understand startups. And the type of engineers we used to work with in from big companies like Amazon, Uber, they just didn't understand startups, didn't want to change to this kind of small company. And initial hiring was very, very hard. And then COVID happened. And at some point, we just, for a year, we were resisting going remote. And at some point, we practically couldn't hire anyone. We had to go and switch to fully remote company, which was very good decision, because right now, I think we got such a good talent and the people all over the US and world. And even leadership team right now is spread out between at least Seattle, Boston, and San Francisco, Bay Area. But that was, I think, hiring and building organization was the hardest part.
You have a talented organization that's growing. Are you using AI internally within Temporal?
Yeah, a lot. We actually have a working group which just tasked to practically bring as much AI as possible, as much as our engineers can and non-engineers can use. We open practically to most tools. We have enterprise licenses for most of them. And we are just decided to try out most of them, and then we will pick and choose at some point. But right now, I don't think we have, we don't have yes, you have to use this LLM or you have to use this tool. We actually practically open for most of them.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is coding, but I'll ask you if there's been a most effective one or two use cases that you see in the org.
I think obviously Gong is probably the most
Gong is phenomenal.
Yeah, outside of engineering, Gong is certainly used by sales a lot, and support and everybody.
Support is the bigger one. A lot of our support tickets are deflected through AI, through a homegrown system essentially. So
you built a homegrown system to do that. That's amazing.
So, but I think to Max's point, I think at least we believe every company is going through this rewiring right now, and people who are not taking AI seriously, essentially, or will have severe problems down the road. So at least the phase where Temporal is right now is we have created an incentive structure in the organization where we just encouraging people to try out. We don't have a recommended recipe. We are encouraging just create budgets, create headcount of people to kind of try out various things. And we have a team who's measuring, who is, for instance, like we are using all models for coding, but we clearly know which one is people using more than others, essentially, or finding it more useful. So I think one of the things that we are kind of set up is like setting up we are setting up the organization for experimentation in AI and creating an incentive structure for that. I'm hoping like over the next year, patterns will start emerging and we'll start having more prescriptive things when we bring on new people in the company.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're bringing on people specifically to experiment, so very interesting.
Yeah.
When did you start doing that as an org? I mean, Gong has been around for a long time, so AI has been around for a long time, but you mentioned in the last 2 years, you've been hearing from a lot of customers about their agentic system. Was that equivalent to when you had the aha moment that we should double down internally, or did that happen at a different time?
So things like Gong, things like support definitely has been going on since last year, essentially. But especially doubling down on agentic AI and especially in the coding space and all of those is an effort we kicked off this year.
But it's mostly just to bring sanity, because obviously we didn't prohibit using those, but people were using credit cards, they're using kind of their own accounts.
Yeah.
And then at some point,
And you
obviously,
lose track of what's happening.
Like
in
at
the
some
sprawl,
point,
too.
our IT and security said, guys, let's organize that and make it and don't prohibit. We don't want to prohibit things, so we just organize things, right?
Yeah. And it allows for more spreading in the org. Like this thing is working really well in this cluster.
Oh, we have channels when people discuss these things. It's not just like you do your own thing, but people actually proactively present and show other people, like show and tell type of kind of.
And that's very important.
Communication.
Like for example, we every 2 weeks we have a sprint showcase.
Oh, cool.
And we have a theme that every sprint showcase there is like what's a new cool use of AI someone has discovered.
Is the sprint showcase something new since you've started focusing on AI, or was that always a tradition within?
So this is actually from day one in the company. I think we are running whatever, like some 100th version of a sprint showcase.
Got it. So the sprint showcase.
It's a pretty it's been there from a very early stages. Of the
but
company.
now it's just a little bit more AI centric because folks are experimenting and building things.
Within that showcase, there is at least 1 or 2 talks around what's a cool new AI use case someone has discovered, essentially.
So Cadence is 8 years old, the technology. Temporal is almost 6 years old. When we invested, you have an idea of how things can look if they go right, but it's very rare that those expectations and reality tend to align. I think in this case, it certainly has. The company's on track to pass 100 million run rate probably in the next quarter or two. As you guys think about the next, half decade, what does success look like? And what are the things that you think about doing now? What are the investments that you want to make sure that we can achieve that?
Like for us, like the success still is when we started the company is I think durable execution becomes just way of life for developers. Or we are a company which is obsessed. We are in this very early stages of adoption for temporal or durable execution as a mechanism for building these class of applications. We see this whole AI as an amazing tailwind for us, which is going to speed up that adoption. Because this is a moment where suddenly the entire world is, the amount of software being written, especially this whole agentic AI space, it presents us an insane opportunity to capture our mission that we started with day one, that where durable execution just becomes way of life for developers for building these class of applications. So we are laser focused essentially on making sure we don't lose sight of that.
And the mission has stayed the same. So I'm just going to ask one more question, which is, how have each of you changed as leaders and as people? You've gone through a lot. You've switched roles since founding Temporal.
I think you just learn a lot. It's just a very different experience, right? It's something which I never experienced before, right? Just building a company from scratch is very very hard to replicate, and certainly become more humble. And one thing which is clearly I probably the most proud of is the team we built. It's just I think for me, just seeing type of people who work for Temporal, which actually kind of carry this durable execution flag and work with users and customers every day. I think this is where for me this was probably the biggest achievement, and I think both me and Samar kind of share that. And like, for example, even when I was CEO, Samar was probably the machine behind hiring most of our leadership team and core engineers. And for me, I think the biggest learning was how to build teams and how to work there. And for me, just current still, I want to be a manager, right, and focus on technical stuff. But I think, I love people because it's amazing to see a team and kind of. When you have an idea and then you have a team working on that idea, it's amazing. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, so I think Max captured it well. For us, by the way, both of us are super opinionated. Both of us are rarely on the same side. So and by the way, this is one of the core strengths for the company. We I think each and every feature at Temporal we have debated to death essentially. And I think that's one of the core strengths is at Temporal is people one of the team that we have built is insanely opinionated. No roles, no titles comes in the way. I think one of the things that I wake up and the thing which I'm excited to go to work is I'm working with a group of people who really cares about the mission and vision that both of us started with. And that is one of the evolutions for us essentially as leaders has exactly been that more technology obsessed, which we still are, but to at this point, both of us take a lot of pride in the team that we have assembled together. And I think at this point, as for me, especially as a role as a CEO, is becoming less and less about technology. It's about how I'm empowering the team that we have built together to do the best work, essentially. And that transition is probably the biggest learning for me as a leader.
It's been an interesting lesson as an investor watching your guys' evolution, because I think typically you would see two individuals who never managed anyone and they're going to start a company. And you would immediately think, well, these guys can't do it. They have no experience. But I think for us, as we got to know you guys before we even invested, the thing that became clear was the level of self-awareness and curiosity that both of you had, and was ultimately the thing that gave you confidence that you guys would figure it out. And self-awareness and curiosity, I think, are indicative of the slope that you have as a founder and ultimately as a leader. And so to see the distance that you've both covered and where the company is and where you both are today, it's phenomenal. And so it's been a privilege to been part of the ride.
Thanks a lot, Lenny, for your trust from day one. So yeah, really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, this was great.
This was awesome.